Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are joining us from, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Zilor Rahman from Business Review, and I will be the host for today. It is our pleasure to have Prism ID with us today, who will be discussing Mind Your Language, Controlling Labeling on a Global Scale. Today's guest speakers are Aristotle Pantelis, who is the US Business Development Manager at Prism ID, and is joined by Chris Doyle, Marketing Manager for Healthcare at GS1 UK. Both Aristotle and Chris will be sharing their advice on managing source data, local language labeling, and country-specific requirements. I would like to take this opportunity to remind the audience that you can submit questions using the Q&A tool at the right-hand side of your screen, and you can do this at any point throughout the presentation. We will then look to allocate around 10 to 15 minutes to try and answer as many questions or thoughts that you may have. So without further ado, please allow me to welcome Aristotle.
Zilor, thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon. And hello, and welcome to all attending. Just now, I've actually been monitoring the attendance and the registrations for this webinar, and I see there are participants from at least 25 countries spanning 4 continents. So I want to say thank you, gracias, efcharistos, spasiba, teshikaradim, and merci to all of you. I'm glad you've joined us today. We have an agenda here that I'm going to forward to. And we have key learning objectives today, as we've stated in our marketing for the event, is to gain an understanding of global labeling in practical terms, to understand how labeling systems can remove perceived complexities of local language labeling, and to realize how to manage source data for labels, booklets, inserts, and IFUs. And then we're going to learn how to customize labels for country-specific requirements. During this webinar today, we're also going to have some poll questions, as Zilor mentioned. And Zilor, you want to present this first poll, please?
Yep, thank you very much, Aristotle. So ladies and gentlemen, we are running the first poll that will be in today's session. In a moment, a polling box will appear on the right-hand side of your screen with a polling question and a selection of answers. So please select the answer that is relevant to you. So the question number 1 is, which sector do you work within? A, medical device, B, pharmaceutical, C, clinical trials, D, general manufacturing, or E, none of the above. So just give the audience a few moments to answer that. But again, which sector do you work within? Medical device, pharmaceutical, clinical trials, general manufacturing, or none of the above.
Right, and so we expect, Zilor, that since based on our registrations and based on who we're marketing to, that the life sciences, the top 3, of course, will be the poll. So I'm glad to, we see the registrations, but it's good to know, and we'll learn shortly who is actually attending. At this point, I believe Chris is going to go ahead and, as the poll's moving forward, Chris will introduce Chris Doyle again, and Chris will start his portion and introduce his agenda, which is the first section of our webinar today.
Indeed. Thanks very much indeed, Aristotle. I can just see the results of that poll coming in, so thank you very much for that. And can I also extend my thanks to Prism ID for inviting me along to this webinar today. Sorry, I'm just trying to take control. There we go.
There you
okay,
go.
So I have it now. Thank you, Aristotle. It's been a pleasure putting this together, working with the people at Prism ID, and we have had quite a lot of fun, and I hope that that will be reflected in the content, and it won't be quite so stultifying as many of the webinars I'm sure you're used to attending. The webinar consists of 2 parts. The first part mostly led by myself, and the second part mostly led by Aristotle. And the 2 parts have been written very closely together. They do relate to each other very well, and I think the maximum benefit from the webinar can be derived from listening to both in that context.
Yeah,
so what I'm going to cover here, I will do a quick run through of GS1 and the GS1 system. On this slide, I want to stress some things which this presentation are not. And one of the things this presentation definitely is not is a big sell about GS1. I am going to assume a certain level of knowledge, which we'll test in a second to see where people are up to. But it will be a quick skim through of the GS1 system and how it relates to the subject matter. Then we'll look rather more closely at the big pieces of legislation, unique device identification, the Drug Quality and Safety Act, from an EU perspective, the Falsified Medicines Directive, the European Medicines Verification System, and I'll also share some upcoming developments in the GS1 spec, which will help with meeting the demands of this legislation. Then we'll go on to look at how we can make this global labeling thing really expensive and difficult for everyone involved, and some clear insights into how we can really add cost when we want to. And then finally, the ultimate answer to the ultimate question of global label management. And as I say, this is not Legislation 101. If you've tuned in just to hear about the legislation, I will not meet your needs, but I hopefully will skim through and pick out the good bits. Okay, so if we start with who is GS1, and the first thing I'd like to try and do is to gain some insight into the audience's understanding of GS1 and the GS1 system. So if we can move, please, Zilla, to the second poll.
There it is.
Yep, absolutely, Chris. So the second poll, again, bottom right hand of your screen is where you can vote. Which of these best describes your knowledge of the GS1 system? A, I have never heard of GS1 before now. B, I have heard of GS1, but I'm not very familiar with the system. C, I am familiar with the GS1 system, but we don't use it here. D, I am familiar with the GS1 system and we make use of it. Or E, I am all over the GS1 system, a GS1 black belt ninja. So they are your options. Please do vote, and we'll give you a few moments. And Chris, just over to you to kind of maybe discuss the question itself and what you're expecting in terms of results.
Certainly. I'm very much hoping that there aren't thousands of GS1 black belts online. Of course, if there were GS1 ninjas online, we wouldn't know because, of course, they'd be undetectable.
Okay.
And I think we have just a few seconds left before we can see the results of this poll. Can we share these live, Zilor?
Yeah, absolutely. We're just going to close the poll itself and share them. If you just give us a few moments whilst that's just processing the answers. There's actually just a few more people giving a few last answers as we wait. But in the meantime, Chris, just over to you. In a few seconds, that should appear on your screen, so you should be able to see the results. Are these effectively what you're expecting? What do you think of these results?
There we go. Okay, so that's good. There's a certain level of familiarity with, let's see, about 1/3 of people saying that they're familiar with to some extent. We have 4 black belts, 4% of black belts, which is good. About another 1/3 have heard of GS1 but not very familiar, and about 1/3 also have never heard of GS1 before now. So that's fine.
Therein lies our task. We can educate the globe today a little bit. So
okay, sure thing. Well, in 5 minutes, let's try and skim through who is GS1 and what is the GS1 system. And I'm fairly sure I can do that quite quickly. So take control back, and there we are. So our history is a 40-year history. We celebrated our 40th birthday last year. And our history really dates back to 1973, when a packet of juicy fruit chewing gum passed through a point of sale in a supermarket in Ohio and became the first product to be scanned at a point of sale and was recognized by the till. Now, if you think back before then, anyone who's old enough to remember, sitting in a supermarket while each item had its price individually racked up on the calculators and the tills was a time-consuming process. And from that very simple identification at the point of sale barcode, over the next 40 years, the system has developed in its complexity and its reach and out from the grocery sector into other sectors to be a unified global system of identification, capture, and share. And in the 70s, obviously, scanning was all the rage and new stuff. In the 80s, we all kind of became computerized. In the 90s, the enablement of radio frequency identification tags changed the world again. And then in the noughties, of course, the mobile revolution and mobile technologies. And these changes applied across multiple sectors, especially grocery, but also including healthcare, of course. Sorry, I seem to have lost control of the... There we are. And GS1, you may know us from previous incarnations and previous names. The UPC, Universal Product Code in the United States. In Europe, the EAN, European Article Number Association. And these organizations came together in 2003 to form GS1. And GS1 is now a global organization with 111 member organizations around the world, operating in 150 countries with over 2 million members. And so what do we need global standards for? Well, global standards, as you can imagine, anyone who has, as I do, teenage children will have a drawer at home filled with mobile phone chargers. And if you travel frequently to different countries, you will know that you have to take all manner of adapters because there is no global standard for electricity delivery. Different voltages, different access points, different shapes of plug and so on. Shoe sizes, another non-standard way, which produces annoyance and inefficiency in our daily life. But in healthcare, the lack of standardization adds risk. Not just inefficiency and cost for all involved, but also an element of risk. Now, my apologies if the two products featured here are those belonging to anybody actually on the call. They are not chosen because of they are particularly unusual or out of whack. They are sadly in pharmaceuticals and in medical devices. Pictures like this are very, very common. On the left, we have an injectable form of it's injectable ibuprofen for pediatric use, featuring 7 different barcodes for different countries and different uses. The medical device on the right-hand side, you can see there are standard GS1 identifiers on here, but there are also many other barcodes for things like production identifiers for use within the factory exclusively, so it smooths the flow. And I happen to have been told that one of these identifiers is actually the part number for the box itself. So when it comes into, if you can imagine yourself at a self-service checkout with one of these products, what would you do with it? Which one would you scan? Or would you just keep scanning until something bleeped? And that kind of inconsistency means that there is inefficiency through the supply chain and a risk of misidentification of the product. Okay, so the GS1 system then is simply broken down into 3 elements. It's a system for the identification of things, the capture of that information, and then sharing that information in a consistent way. The identify part is effectively numbers. We have what we call GS1 keys, which are the standards for identification. The one most of us are familiar with is the second one down on that list, the Global Trade Item Number, the GTIN. And this is a standard 13 or 14-digit number which identifies a traded item. There are other keys to identify things such as locations. You can serialize a GTIN to identify particular objects, and that's of great interest to us in this field. There are different keys for identifying assets, documents, coupons, containers, and so on. And so these different keys are a consistent global number system which assigns a unique number to particular items. Then there are the technologies for capturing that information in an automatic way. And these are the barcodes or the RFID codes, which will encode those numbers in a consistent format, meaning that any reader anywhere in the world will get the same information when it looks at it. And we're all familiar with the linear barcodes, which you can see at the top. And in the healthcare sector, we're more familiar, again, with the data matrix style barcodes and QR codes, which you can see there, the chessboard kind of codes. And then the GS1 standard system extends into the sharing of this information, and it has a series of standards around data synchronization, transactional data for e-business and e-commerce, and event data, EPCIS data, EPSIS is the event capture standard. and we'll talk more about that later. So there, a 5-minute skim through of what the GS1 system is. I hope that's brought everyone up to a similar level of understanding. I will not be distributing black belts. Of course, there would be black and white belts for the GS1 system, and that apparently wasn't funny according to colleagues in the room. So I'll move quickly on.
Right.
Okay, so now let's move on to the legislative drivers which are going to affect labeling in increasing volume over the next 3 or 4 years. And the ones I'll cover here from a US perspective, the Unique Device Identification Rule and the Drug Quality and Safety Act. It's the second part of that act that I'll be talking about. We're not going to go into the details of compounding pharmacies in the first part. So it's really the Drug Supply Chain Security Act element of the DQSA that I'll cover. From an EU perspective, we look at the Falsified Medicines Directive, which is a lot of talk and little action at the moment. And coming out of the Falsified Medicines Directive, the European Medicines Verification System, that's the EMVS.
All right. Are these, Chris, the only big pieces of legislation affecting labeling and packaging, or are there more of these around the world that you've identified?
Yeah, there are an awful lot of initiatives, Aristotle, thanks for the question, around the world, right. All focused on security and serialization of packaging, security in the supply chain, and patient safety. The countries that spring to mind immediately are Brazil, India, Turkey, China. They're all undertaking some element of serialization, and I know that there are many others which I cannot speak of with any authority or knowledge. So I'm sure that our participants will know of their local requirements.
Exactly.
So if I can just ask another quick poll question, and this one regards which legislative driver will have the most impact on your business over the coming 5 years? Is it the UDI, Unique Identification Rule? Zalora, can you get this poll up, please?
Yep. Chris, I'm just opening the poll now. So, ladies and gentlemen,
there we go.
You should have the questions in front of you. Chris, do you want to continue? You're doing so well with the options.
Okay. Firstly, is it the UDI, Unique Device Identification Rule, the DQSA, the European FMD, serialization legislation from other countries outside the EU or US, or none of the above?
Brilliant.
And I'm just hoping we don't end up with too many none of the above,
right?
Because most of the rest of the presentation is really quite relevant to these things.
Perfect. Well, we'll give the audience members a few moments to vote on that. And again, ladies and gentlemen, bottom right hand of your screen, please do vote. Which legislative driver will have the most impact on your business in the next 5 years? A, the FDA's Unique Device Identification Rule. B, the US Drug Quality and Safety Act. C, the EU Falsified Medicine Directive. D, serialization legislation for medicines or devices in a country, territory outside the EU or USA. Or E, none of the above.
Okay, can we share those answers now?
Absolutely, Chris. I am just closing the poll now, and I will be sharing the results shortly. So what I would like to do in the meantime, whilst it's just taking a few seconds to process, is just remind the audience that there will be a Q&A at the end. So please do make sure that when Chris and Aristotle are going through some important points, you have various questions, please do use the chat function at the bottom right hand of your screen to ask your questions. And like I said at the intro, we will go through those for about 15 or 20 minutes. So over to you, Chris and Aristotle, to discuss the results.
Okay, so the results, we did in fact get 15% of none of the above, and I'm hoping that you'll stay with us because it is interesting anyway. The biggest answer by far there, 37%, the Unique Device Identification Rule, which is the big
imminent now.
If we combine the next two, which are to do with serialization of pharmaceuticals, that adds up to another 34%. and then 14% have answered that it's a serialization legislation from another territory. So we appear to be right on song and on message with our audience.
Good.
So let's go through these one at a time. And as I say, this is not going to be a 101. This is everything about the legislation, but looking at what the meaning behind them is and what they're there for. And this slide, for anyone in the device world, will strike fear into your heart. At the top there, we have the French PIP breast implant, which caused so much controversy last year. And at the bottom there, a metal-on-metal hip, which we all know now to be not a good thing.
Right.
I think that one of the interesting things about the PIP breast implant scandal is that in the UK last year, we had a great big food safety scandal where it emerged that a number of food products had horse meat in them, which was identified as beef. And of course, we in Great Britain, we love our horses, and this caused terrible, terrible kerfuffle. But within minutes of the supermarkets finding out that there was suspected horse meat in some products, these products were removed from shelves, and they were removed within 20 minutes in some cases from the entire supply chain. And to be able to do that, to be able to identify exactly where things are, is a very impressive thing to do. If we contrast that with the PIP breast implant scandal, 42,000 women in Britain received these implants, and we still don't know who they all are. To date, only 1,200 have had them removed, and the rest either have decided not to have them removed or simply don't know they have them, because the allocation of the product to the person is very, very poor, and mostly done by means of paper-based written systems. So the driver behind the UDI rule in the States is stated as the ability of a physician choosing a device to choose more safely for the patient. So the ability to get information about the device to the physician. And I'm sure we're all fairly familiar with the methods of doing this, and the fact that serialization, described by the FDA themselves as an audacious piece of legislation, to individually identify each individual medical device. It's a huge undertaking, but one which I think they've started in the right way about. And of course, enhanced PMS and EHRs are part of this and a part of the answer and the solution there.
And Chris, at this point, just for clarification, for those that might not know, PMS and EHRs, can you explain that?
Yes, it's a GS1 thing. We slip into three-letter acronyms very quickly.
We all
PMS,
do,
yeah. Post-marketing surveillance and recording in EHRs, which is electronic health records. And okay, I think the recording in electronic health records is a very important thing because it will drive a change in the way healthcare is delivered on the ground, that scanners and such will have to become more familiar. We ran a small test in the UK last year. We gave a number of people a 13-digit number, which is similar to a GTIN, and asked them to copy it down. And we had a failure rate with just a 13-digit number of about 1 in 6. So 1 in 6 people would fail to copy a 13-digit number correctly. For UDI, the majority of people are looking at using 30-digit alphanumeric serial numbers. So if you can imagine in a busy operating room trying to write down a unique 30-digit alphanumeric number for every device used, you're never going to get it right. And so the automatic recording of these numbers from machine-readable codes, barcodes, is going to be inevitable. Okay, so that's UDI.
And you know, in this, I'm just thinking here of another question actually. So if a company is producing medical devices in China, right, and only marketing it in, say, Turkey, for example, will it need a UDI for the information to be entered in on the GUDID?
Okay, the GUDID, the Global Unique Device Identification Database.
Exactly, another acronym, right? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. It's most commonly called the GUDID, which I think is a beautiful piece of acronym usage. So the Global Unique Device Identification Database, GUDID, good ID. Strictly speaking, if you're manufacturing, let's go back to your question, you're manufacturing in China, you're only selling in Turkey, then American legislation cannot say you must identify your product like this and you must upload the data about it into our database. If that's where you're manufacturing and that's where you're selling, then no, strictly speaking, you're not going to. But I think it's generally recognized that it's very unlikely that other identification and security systems will gather much support or use, simply because the device market globally, the medical device market, is so US-centric, and the number of manufacturers quite small. The number of the amount of use in the US is so large that to run different identification and verification systems separate to UDI would seem to me just a great way to add cost. And we'll come to that later. That part of this presentation is how we make this more expensive. So no, I think that it's a personal opinion, but I think UDI is it globally. Okay, and some breaking news on the GS1 system. The GS1 system.
Breaking news, right?
It's always good to learn new stuff. And this is something I learned about in the last 2 weeks. That the GS1 system as it exists at the moment would say that if we have a different pack in a different country, for example, exactly the same product in a different pack with the labeling in a different language, then we would classically need to use a different GTIN to identify that pack. Now, what we can see here on the screen is a standard GS1 data matrix with a GTIN identified. If you look just after it says GTIN in the brackets, there is a 01. Now that is called the application identifier. Now the application identifier 01 identifies a GTIN. The next one down, the 10, identifies a batch number, which is in this case test 5632. The next down, number 17, is the application identifier for an expiry date. And then 21, the application identifier for a serial number. What we have announced is that this year we will launch a new application identifier for a pack variation. So it will be possible to have a number of different packs with the same GTIN. So the same product identifier, but say one would be pack variation number 1, which would be English, pack variation number 2 maybe German, pack variation number 3 maybe French labeled. So it's the same product with different label, different pack variations around the world. And that has been developed, that new standard has been developed in order to address the demands of our members specifically relating to UDI.
Okay, you know, can we back up to that one?
Yep.
Just regarding this again, I guess I wouldn't be Aristotle if I didn't ask a bunch of questions, but on this, what extent of variation in the different pack, would this allow? And I guess I have an example. Could a box containing, let's say, 3 devices be one variation, and a box containing 4 devices be another? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I see what you mean. So if we have a box with, say, 4 knees in, 4 prosthetic knees, could we have that as variation number 1 and then variation number 2 with the same? Okay, the answer to that specifically is no, because the number of products contained in a pack is too much of a change for it to be a similar pack. But if we think of a box containing 4 knees with its labeling in French and a box containing 4 knees with its labeling in German, then that would be a valid variation. I can't speak exactly because I haven't seen the exact wording of the final standard yet about exactly what variation will be allowed, but it would definitely not extend as far as different numbers within the pack.
As far as that, okay. Good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so DQSA, the Drug Supply Chain and Security Act, and for me this was a remarkable piece of US legislation. I used to be a lawyer, I should say to people, and when I speak about the beauty of legislative drafting, I would encourage you all to read the words of this act because it is beautifully written. It's a very cleverly done thing, and it was done surprisingly quickly. But what it will do which is of great benefit, I think, to the industry, will be to sweep away the state-level e-pedigree laws, which were in development and in use. So the Californian, the Floridian, and the various other which were in development will now all be replaced by a single federal law, and the Title II of it, the Supply Chain Security Act, is what most of us will be affected by. There is this impossibly, everyone thinks, tight deadline of January the 1st at the end of this year for lot or batch level data transfer. And to set up the electronic systems to run lot batch level data transfer for all pharmaceuticals moving in the United States is going to be tremendously difficult. And external commentators are saying that, yes, that will be impossible to meet. Internal commentators, however, and I would refer you to rxtrace.com as an excellent commentator on this field, the internal commentators say that this is not so much of a change from what they already have, because the paper e-pedigree systems that were running previous to this, based on 1980s legislation, will pretty much answer the requirements of this. But obviously it will require, as time goes on, a much more granular level of traceability and analysis, and we will have to be able to know exactly where each lot and batch, and indeed each pack, has gone. The GS1 system, and I mentioned EPCIS earlier, the Event Capture System, does not at the moment fully support lot and batch level data transfer. But intriguingly, I've included a picture of boxes of fish at the bottom here, and more on that later about why there are boxes of fresh from the trawler.
Yeah, and I guess the comment on that is it's just quite interesting that the California and Florida pedigree laws were not progressed, and that the federal law supersedes them. That's significant.
Yeah, and I think certainly from a UK perspective, that tension between state law and federal law in the States is always very interesting. And for a federal law to sweep away intended state laws, that there would very often be an element of chagrin, I think, about that. But there is none at all. The federal lawmakers were very, very grateful to the Californian and Floridian, particularly, state legislatures for the work that they've done. And the outputs that they've produced, as I say, are extremely robust and a fine example.
And of course, this affects all. But being based here in the U.S., I'm in Boston today. You're over in London. This legislation has been keen. I've been keen to stay up on this. So thank you for emphasizing that today.
Yeah, and as I say, that rxtrace.com is an excellent blog, occasionally light-hearted, which is very much current on what's going on. So well worth a look there.
Okay.
So I have no interest in that blog at all, except that it is an interesting thing. I'm not trying to push anyone towards any particular data.
Right. Well, no, it's good insight.
Other blogs may be available. Okay. Okay, and then the final big legislative driver I'd like to just cover over here is the Falsified Medicines Directive. Slightly less well developed than the DQSA at the moment, because we're waiting for the delegated legislation, which will define exactly what needs to happen. Again, another two pictures to strike fear into the heart of anyone that's ever given their children pharmaceuticals in any shape or form. And on the left here, I simply offer two links to you as the two most common links that I use when discussing this particular area. The link at the top will take you to a list of all the enabling legislation for FMD in each individual member state of the EU. And to have them all listed there in their fierce complexity is a very handy resource. The one at the bottom is a link to the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industry Associations website. So that's the EFPIA website, and a paper they published jointly with us at GS1 looking at the European Medicines Verification System. If there is a piece of audacity in the whole of this presentation, then I think the EMVS is it. This is a verification system to enable patients and pharmacists at the point of use of medicine to verify the medicine. using the requirements of the Falsified Medicines Directive, to be able to produce a European-wide system across 29 member states that will enable that, with all the cross-border trading that goes on and so in Europe, will, for me, be a tremendously wonderful thing if we can do it. And given particularly the National Health Service's experience of huge IT projects, I'm going to sit back and watch that one happen. And I won't be laughing.
Exactly. Okay. Well, on this slide, just so the attendees understand, we will make this presentation available afterward, and you'll all receive it, so you'll be able to have these links when you receive that. But just this is quite interesting. Can you just clarify what we're all looking at the bottom right picture? I find that image quite interesting.
Sorry, if anyone can knows how to scrape it off and put it into a Google image search, it is a fascinating one. That black figure in the middle there is a policeman. And this is an overhead view. It's an overhead view of him walking across a single seizure of counterfeit medicines made in China. I think it was early last year. But it's an Associated Press picture. I should acknowledge the copyright on that one.
Okay.
But yeah, it's a terrifying picture. Every single box there is counterfeit. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so some further update, which will probably be more interesting to those people already familiar at some level with the GS1 system. But the enablement of lot or batch traceability in the EPCIS system standard, the Event Capture Standard, is actually big news for anyone involved in the DQSA in the States. So this will be updated this year. I currently think it will be in the first half of the year, though I can't promise that. And it's being updated on the basis of an initiative originally driven by the fish industry. Food traceability is becoming as important a topic as pharmaceutical and device traceability, and the ability for the fish industry to do that was what was required, and so we updated the standard. That standard is directly translatable into pharmaceuticals, and there we go. That's the second bit of big news I have for you. I'm sure there'll be dancing in the streets at that piece of news.
Right.
Okay, so if we can move on just very quickly now to the commonality between these bits of legislation. They're driven by patient safety consideration. They will require pack-level identification, and that will ultimately require a method for allocating who got what, which patient got which pack, which patient got which device. And for me, that implies a verification at the point of use. This allocation to patients will have to be electronically managed. As I say, no one's going to be able to copy out 30-digit alphanumeric serial numbers into patient records. And what will that will then enable, if every product is allocated directly to an individual patient, will enable research and outcomes data to be analyzed far more closely. And the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency in the UK is already investing quite heavily in its Clinical Practice Research Database, CPRD, in order to enable longitudinal analysis of medical devices in the UK. So it has the opportunity to release a lot more information, a lot better information, and to smooth the flow of product through the supply chain while increasing patient safety. So the opportunity for that, of course, places some demands and costs on the people who are making the products and labeling them. And inline labeling and identification, clearly a big deal. And for me, the key behind that is data quality and data management. Additional considerations, which we'll just skip through quickly: repackaging and cross-border trading. We have to consider anti-competitive behavior. Is anything we're doing here designed or likely to have a negative impact on cross-border trade? While it might be appealing to try and have a negative impact, it is apparently illegal to try and have a negative impact. So that's a consideration which needs to be borne in mind. Additionally, data pools for healthcare procurement are becoming more common. The UK last year announced that it would have one. Australia and Canada already have one. Ireland progressing very quickly. So these are central data repositories for master data about healthcare products, which will be used by healthcare systems for procurement. We need to think about those. And then just a general caution on over-responsiveness, which I'm not sure quite the value of, but it struck me, particularly as the Californian and Floridian systems were being developed, that people were moving quickly to try and fit with them. And then, of course, now they've disappeared to be replaced by something similar but not the same. So is there a caution that we shouldn't maybe respond too knee-jerk to everything, but try and consider a global response to these impacts? So with those additional considerations, I'd like to move on to the meat of my presentation, which is how we make it really expensive. And I think it's fairly clear how we do this. And the third point I think is key here, that we don't centralize the management of master product data. We let each individual territory that handles our product do it in their own way. We confuse master data with functional and performance data of a product. We require healthcare providers to use lots of different systems to verify different products from different manufacturers. We ignore the other benefits. So if we can identify everything and we know exactly where it is, that can make for a very, very efficient, well-planned and forecasted supply chain. But if we ignore those efficiencies, then it can cost us more if we want it to. And then, of course, from a GS1 perspective, non-standardized identification of products in different territories is a great way to add cost. And I think it's very interesting to note that particularly in a healthcare supply chain, ultimately cost only moves one way. Cost moves down the supply chain and ends up with the healthcare provider. And we are all, I think, in situations around the world after the crisis of 2007 and 8, where there isn't enough money to go around in healthcare providers. And if we're determined to push cost onto them, then I think here is a list of things that we could do. Exactly how much it could cost, two little links at the bottom. One is to a McKinsey report, which estimates the amount of money which could be saved globally by manufacturers, distributors, and healthcare providers from the use of a single way of identifying products globally. And the second one, an interesting addition from BlueSphere in the UK, and it's a list of apology letters for people to send to their shareholders in 3 or 4 years' time if we don't get this right now. That we'll be able to send these letters to shareholders of our company saying, look, we're not allowed to sell our stuff anymore because it's not properly identified and it's all a bit confusing and we should have done something in 2014. Okay, so what's the big secret? How do we make it so that that cost doesn't happen? And here's the big secret. It's about master data management. That if you're able to handle and manage your data as a valuable communication tool with your customers, then it will answer a lot of the questions itself. I worked in pharmaceuticals and medical devices for many, many years, and it was very often the case that you could pull up to the gate and the guy that opened the gate for you would know more about the N numbers and P numbers of the latest piece of clinical trial or randomized control work that had been done, whereas you ask him how much a box of some of the stuff weighs, he'd have no idea. When launching a new product, it was always fun and games trying to find out how much cardboard is in the box, how much recyclable material in the box, what are the excipients that are in the box, what are the ingredients of, what's the nickel content, who's allergic to it. When you pack it onto a pallet, how many go on the pallet, what's the weight of the pallet. These kind of pieces of information get lost through the systems. We can find out the functional performance data of these products very, very well indeed, but this master data that sits behind them is generally not very well managed. And if we're able to manage that, and then the information also that needs to be on patient information leaflets, instructions for use, and so on, if we're able to manage that all centrally, and then have the local aspects of that central information available as needs on a country-by-country basis, then that gets us closer to the answer to doing this whole thing right. If we decentralize that and allow people to handle it locally and in a less cost-efficient way, then we will not be able to realize the other benefits that these serialization initiatives will help us to realize. So there it is, the final big C, big secret ultimate key, master data quality management. So at this point, I would like to show you another 2D data matrix. If anyone can work out what that says, that will be interesting and fun. I can hear iPhones being picked up all over the country, all over the world, in fact 25 countries. And I'd like to hand over to Aristotle now to take on the second part of the presentation. The second and more interesting part, I should say.
No, not at all. It's a good segue. I mean, I appreciate the master data segue. So thank you, Chris. And again, it's been my pleasure to get to know you. I know we're charging toward our timeline here, so I'm going to get as much information in as possible. And I know Prism ID is proud of and values our GS1 accredited partner status, and that our companies have many more years working together, ahead of us. So thanks, Chris. I know we're going to charge at the end, so I'll talk to you offline later on. So for this webinar, we're continuing to talk about global labeling and controlling global labeling. And Chris has talked about some of the elements of labeling, but what does global labeling control actually look like? Specifically, what does a global labeling solution look like, and how does the data get to a GS1 standard barcode? So besides the barcode, how do all the elements of a label with data as the central focus get collected, then processed to be incorporated on your product label? And so we'll look at those in a little while. So let's ask a poll question here, and I'll continue after that, about which best describes how your company is organized. And this will give me an idea as I move forward here. Are you in one location? Are you moving globally, expanding soon? But you're in one location currently. Are you in multiple locations worldwide, but only label in one language? Or the third possibility here by our poll is you're in multiple locations worldwide, and you need to label in multiple languages. Or in that case, C would be you are doing this currently. You're just looking for a better solution to do that. So if you could go ahead and respond. Zilla, we're going to run this poll for how long?
We'll just give it another 30 seconds or so. In the meantime, it just gives me a great opportunity to say, after this webinar, of course, there will be a Q&A. So, guys, to the audience members, please do start submitting your questions. There is a chat function to be able to type in your questions, so please do so. Aristotle and Chris are here live today for you guys to be able to kind of go through as many of those as we can. So we intend to go through about 15, 20 minutes of a Q&A session. It should be fantastic. Aristotle, yeah. Any other details that you want to get across before we show the results?
Well, not on this question, but we'll go ahead and continue with my portion right after you show the results here. Go ahead.
Perfect. Yep. I am just waiting for those to get processed. Just a reminder, again, and Aristotle did mention it earlier, that to the audience members that the slides will be made available. I'll remind everybody at the end how they can do that, and that will be accessible for everybody, and also the video to today's webinar. So, Aristotle, the results should be live. You should be able to see them.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, so we're significant global locations. Everybody's multiple, language, 73% or so working globally. Managing locations globally, you need to label in multiple languages. So, of course, that's why we're here today. So let me go ahead and continue on. Go through the slides. And again, we're talking about getting a data management solution, and then you can obtain control. So since you've joined the webinar, you're trying to get control of the operations. And to do that, you should be operating an optimum global labeling system where you and your team are performing the vast majority of your design to print production electronically. And so an optimum life science global labeling system operates completely within a closed, secure, and validated environment with secure connectivity to your ERP, MES, and PLM systems. A global labeling system allows you to utilize data as needed within your labeling operations in achieving a highly data-driven labeling process on your production floor or in your global distribution centers in real time. Further, by using a validated labeling solution which is purpose-built for the life sciences, and exists to manage labeling operations from design to print and inspection across an enterprise with global reach, you can effectively control all the activities throughout your labeling operation, even extending out securely to manage and capture the labeling functions handled on your behalf by your third-party operations. So delivering a global labeling lifecycle management solution and the benefits of using a purpose-built global labeling solution are tighter process control, a robust audit log, and viability across global operations so that your product is produced and distributed in the right numbers, to the right places, with the correct label content, and at the right time. Our focus is achieving greater control and management of the label data across the enterprise, and specifically managing the magnitude of language variability required in meeting localized and regionalized labeling requirements. Again, controlling labeling globally means controlling the data. And through our experiences in working with companies in your industry, there are a number of common key challenges that the companies have to overcome by implementing a global labeling system. And I'll just highlight some of these, and we'll delve into the ones that we're focusing on today. So language management, and we'll talk about that in depth a little bit further. Expansion. Expansion is whenever companies wish to exploit the opportunities offered by introductions to new geographies or leveraging the benefits of a merger and acquisition activity, et cetera, or deciding to operate 24/7. Country of origin, managing various complexities that surround country of origin, made in, manufactured in statements especially. And this gives you the ability to have confidence that the appropriate procedures are built into the packaging and label process when you're considering country of origin, rather than being left to interpretation on the line. So we'd also have insert management. I'm going to get into a little bit more, speak about insert management. EIFU, I'm going to speak in depth about EFIU. And we have consolidation. That's where an organization has organically expanded and has acquired many systems across disparate facilities that require multiple vendors with different responsibilities and service level agreements. You have a compelling opportunity to standardize all your operations. Kit labeling is another area of an issue, and managing the complex relationships between components making up a kit. We have UDI, which Chris has been spent some significant time on today. And then we have label defect control. And again, even where each part of the process has been subject to incessant review and approval cycles, defects that originate in supplier stock defects, printer malfunctions, or print irregularities may still occur. So those are some of the top issues. All right, so today we want to just delve into more about language management challenge. Handling all the data and metadata that revolves around written language is a challenge that most life science product manufacturers, all of you, have to address in order to take advantage of the truly global marketplace. So traditionally, there have been many approaches to language management, such as where the product packaging is large enough, a single label is applied, that every language then could be required on that label. Producing an English-only label for the product and then including costly multilingual booklets either in or on the product has been. How about introducing a secondary packaging step that takes information from a language-neutral primary label and then retrieves the layout and data for a subsequent label to be applied over the top or next to the primary label. And then regional labeling, where distribution sites apply regional language labels to the product. So although each of those avenues of addressing the challenge of multilingual labeling seems straightforward, there are complexities and costs embedded with each approach. So some questions to consider in this area. How is the language information captured? What mechanism ensures that the translated content is appropriate to the final product? Where a product is potentially going to any one of, let's say, 50 countries that may require numerous languages, it is unreasonable assumption that you would be able to, or your operators would be able to identify product designation errors, let alone problems relating to technical content of the label in a language that the operator is not even a native speaker of. So solutions to this are various. Having the language information captured as an image and embedded on the label is one approach that addresses the primary issue and also overcomes lack of Unicode support within legacy systems that you have. But it introduces other issues such as distortion of pictures by print devices, version controlling the images, and size of the database storage required. Capturing the English language content and then using a data structure to control the various translations that each product requires is yet another method. And this provides a flexible approach, but ultimately suffers when a large product catalog is required. Typically, either the base product information is duplicated many times, or the records contain so much information that the change control of such records becomes a considerable burden at operational and management levels. So how does the language information actually get reviewed? What processes ensure the individual phrases are checked before they are printed onto a final label, and how does the label design tie up with the product regulatory requirements to ensure that only the approved languages are printed on the label? In the most part, these challenges are addressed by building customer-specific applications that focus on managing the language components exclusively, and then either building custom integrations or relying upon copy and paste to move content from one system or to another. In all those cases, it indicates additional risk, increased cost of ownership, and further challenges when trying to change those requirements. So language labeling. So that was a lot of questions on the previous slide, but how about some answers? Ultimately, destination labeling solutions must be specific to the individual requirements and must address the reality of the model that your company is operating. However, regardless of whether you desire to implement country-specific primary packaging, country-specific secondary packaging, or regional multi-language labeling, an effective global labeling solution offers a toolkit of capability that will support delivering the right translation to the right product label at the right time. And I've said that twice, and that's quite important. So by elevating language to a first-level data item in its own right that behaves according to a defined set of rules, a global labeling solution allows you to define dictionaries that contain key phrases that are controlled within translations that are language-specific, and more importantly, are version and approval controlled in the context of that written language. This allows you the flexibility to define large dictionaries of mostly static content that can be reused in many areas alongside smaller dictionaries that are specific to individual situations. So a global labeling system should understand the importance of language to the final product, to the final printed label. Whenever language-specific content is designed into the data structure or into a specific label or IFU, the system should allow the user to view the content in their chosen language. This means that the data can be curated independently of the layout and then immediately applied to specific label situations to assess the suitability of the individual phrase. So this capability to govern the process of multiple languages or language labeling is a critical part of a global labeling solution and should require no customer-specific components in order to deliver value immediately to customers. And I know we're running up on time, but I want to get through a couple more if possible, and then we'll see if there's anybody still with us and want to ask some questions. But an insert management challenge, for the purpose of this discussion, I'm referring to inserts, same as outserts, booklet labels. So just the generic term insert for booklet labels, outserts, and inserts. And it doesn't diminish the other two terms. But the challenges for all product-associated printed matter are similar. The process of ensuring inserts are included with specific products has evolved to the level where inserts are treated as products in their own right and are included in the bill of materials for any finished goods. Given that a typical business may choose to procure an inventory 3 to 6 months of stock for each insert, and that the inserts themselves are required for each variant of the product, that the insert information itself is subject to change control, review, approval, and version control processes, will invariably involve many languages and the complexities of managing the translated content. It's easy to comprehend why management of inserts is generally regarded as a challenge. So the business justification seeking an alternative supply chain solution to your insert management is crystal clear when you consider the following: the cost of production, whether insourced or outsourced, the cost of stock holding, logistics, additional warehouse space for the stored and printed documents, the lead time for changes to be implemented, the evaluation time for the revised IFU to make it available in inventory, and the value of that inventory, the write-off costs for that once the information on the insert has actually been revised. So what is a solution? And a solution, as the internet continues to play an increasing part in our daily life, regulatory bodies are increasingly comfortable with allowing end users to utilize the net. So in Europe, as we've talked about with Chris earlier, EIFU regulations allow the dissemination of electronic IFUs within the published guidelines. Effective global labeling solutions embrace these opportunities and can work hand in hand with your content management system to ensure that product changes that are implemented in operations are reflected on the website immediately. In the marketplace, over the last few years, there have been some significant innovations with regards to EIFU that support alternatives to this existing paradigm, the labeling paradigm. So an effective global labeling solution should now have support for static content documents such as Adobe PDFs as labels within the packaging tiers. The solution should be enabled to associate specific documents to specific products in specific languages and to print out pre-designed and approved inserts during the primary packaging process. Where languages are known in advance, in a build-to-order scenario, for example, the solution should simplify the process by reducing your stock holding requirement, the cost of disposal, and lead time on changes to virtually zero, and should enable a more versatile packaging process to deliver additional value to your customers, your business, and your shareholders. So a global labeling solution that is integrated with Microsoft Office products will improve the process even further. Desktop integration allows IFU templates to be designed and created within Microsoft Word and then imported to the labeling solution. At your production time, the system should be able to generate a document on the fly that is that is a product and language specific. So that document can then be printed to any available and appropriate printing device, just like one of your laser printers. By leveraging the ability to produce inserts just in time, production-specific information may also be added to the insert. So for traditional IFUs, this may not be a requirement, but for quality certifications, certificates of authenticity, I said that well, and other product documentation, the ability to ensure that the packaging, labeling, and inserts all share lot-specific data is a valuable benefit. My belief is these innovations will ultimately lead to the IFU as a printed cost item within the bill of materials becoming a thing of the past. So with a purpose-built global labeling solution at your disposal, you can accomplish the control and sanity you seek in your global labeling operations. I chose this slide to be the last as I was hoping to have properly used our time, and I know we've run over a little bit, but I'll conclude my presentation now. So here at PRISM, we've been pleased to offer several webinars each year where we delve into specific parts of the vast area of labeling. I encourage you to register on prismid.com to listen to our previous webinars. They all interlink. And it's been my honor to present with you today, Chris. Thank you. And I'll look forward to continuing the discussion around these topics with all of you who are listening individually when we have the opportunity. Thank you so much. And Zilla, are you still on the line with us?
I am indeed, Aristotle.
All right. And so I know we've run over as far as Q&A.
That's completely fine. No, we can obviously go through some of the questions that have come in. So what we'll do is we'll just shoot straight over to the Q&A session. There is actually a question that has just come in, which I will just kind of pose to both you and Chris. Do you see a use for e-labeling in the future to help with local language issues?
Chris, you want to take that?
Hi, yeah. I mean, I think it's the only way to deal with local language issues. I think if we look at the way we do things now, and we compare it to I think always a good comparison is the electronic consumer goods field. They have used individual identification and multi-label languaging globally for a long, long time. And I think when we place our admittedly more heavily regulated labeling environments next to theirs, then we do look particularly prehistoric. So I think the only valid way the only valid way forward in this field is with e-labeling.
Okay.
Aristotle, you may disagree with me there, but
no. Zilla, I see another question came in there. That seems to be my background. It's pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know which one you're referring to, but the one I
saw this font size question, which is kind of generic, but it's interesting.
Yeah, so, absolutely. No worries. Yeah, so the question is there a minimum font size to use if we need to get multiple languages on one label?
Okay, yeah, and is there a minimum font size? Which kind of, it goes right to the print, but from a software perspective, a solution perspective, there's no restriction on font size before the system is installed and configured, but it must be readable. So the system would be configured to actually restrict how small a font can go when printed, and if a copy fit routine is used and the text tries to go too small, then the system would alert the user to that situation. The label just simply won't print. And we don't specify font size because it's dependent upon the printing technology, number one, regulatory, of course, and this is the main restrictions. Of course, any regulatory restriction in the U.S., for example, 6-point font, for example. But if you know the printing technology you are using, we'd be happy, of course, to make recommendations based, to help you restrict that font size. So that was a good question. And that goes right to the part of global labeling. There's regulations across the globe, so.
Great, thank you for that, Aristotle. One question that has come in, I don't know whether I'm putting you guys on the spot, but this question is, how does UDI apply to surgical sets? No packaging or AIDC exists in the operating room. Is that something that you guys can answer, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I saw that one come in and thought straight away, here's someone who knows about UDI, because this kind of does cut straight to the very heart of the legislation.
Right.
This is the most complicated. It's the most complicated bit. What they in the UDI legislation they call it kits, and the way it's dealt with is very similar to the way the UDI legislation approaches pretty much everything. It says, look, here's a general case. And the general case is being, you must put a unique device identifier on everything. There's the general case. And now here's a list of exceptions. And it's those exceptions which make the complexity here. So the general case for a surgical set or a kit is that it's the set or kit itself that must be uniquely identified. As you say, that there is very little in the way of AIDC currently in the operating room. I think that situation will change as we have to allocate specific things, specific sets to specific patients. So the general rule then is that yes, you put the unique device identifier on the set. The big exception there is if there is any part of the set which is intended to be reprocessed and reused. If that part of a set is intended to be reprocessed or reused, for example, some forceps or so on, then they require a direct part mark. So the part itself, not the package it comes in, must be marked. So I think that just about covers it without getting, there are plenty of other exceptions and oddities in that rule. But I think that covers it in its most general sense. Or at least I hope it does, Mark, who asked the question.
Brilliant, thank you for that, Chris. What I wanted to do, just as a kind of final conclusion, both Chris and Aristotle, was just get you to give a kind of little final thoughts summary of obviously what we've been discussing today, and then obviously we'll wrap up, seeing as we've kind of gone 10 minutes over. So over to you, Chris, first, and then Aristotle, just final thoughts of the day.
Okay, final thoughts is that the devil is in the detail, and the detail is the master data you store. The priority of that data as critical to your customer's choice of your product is, I think, the key here to finding the will to enable the technologies to meet the demands of all this legislation.
Yeah, and you know, we're going to go ahead and I think we're going to finish, but I know there's going to be other questions coming in, and so all those questions, Zilla, are going to be answered and responded to that are outside of our time lot. That's correct, and that's the way we've done our webinars in the past. So I know that you know, this has been an enjoyable experience for me, again, understanding and learning a little bit about what Chris has offered us. For our part at PRISM, you know, this is what we do every day and all day long, and so, you know, we're looking forward to having some of these discussions around. You know, we have a question here that somebody's asking: would they are these companies becoming professional printers in their own right? And to some extent, you know, we're trying to make that process easy if they're choosing to do these processes internally. So yes, technically, those who are not printing have the opportunity to choose to create a labeling solution internally that can they can handle the print functions themselves on certain labels. So I was just answering a question in the wrap-up there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aristotle. Yeah, as Aristotle did mention, the questions that were unanswered today, what we'll do is we'll make sure some sort of document is prepared, which will be shared on our Business Review webinars website. But thank you very much, Aristotle and Chris, for what was a great presentation, and thank you to the audience for attending this session today.
Yes.
The presentation slides, as I've mentioned, the webinar recording, and a document with the answers will be available at www.business-review-webinars.com, and that's webinars with an S at the end. We look forward to sharing further webinars with you, so please do keep an eye out on the website just mentioned, and follow us on Twitter at BR Webinars for daily updates, and join our LinkedIn group, Business Review Webinars. Thank you once again for everybody that's attended. Chris, Aristotle, thank you very much for your brilliant presentation, and thank you to PRISM ID for sponsoring the session today. And everybody have a great day.
All righty. Take care.
Thank you all, and goodbye.
Thank you, Chris.